My story begins about 17 years ago. I was a young 17-year-old girl that just finished my high school, and my parents, along with some friends, sent me to UNZA to go and buy application forms to go into university the following year. And upon getting those forms at the academic office, I looked at the papers, and by then, I'd already decided what it is that I wanted to be. And my parents, being in the law enforcement, thought I was obviously going to go to law school. But when I got my forms, I decided to become a special education specialist. This didn't make my parents very happy. And more so, most of my peers that I'd gone with did not understand that decision that I had made to become a teacher to teach children living with disabilities. And as expected, I think I became the laughingstock of the squad because we all had good grades, and they thought being a teacher is probably at the bottom of the food chain, career-wise. And worse so because you have decided to go and teach children that are not normal. So 4 years into the course, I tried to convince my friends, but it didn't work. And now, 17 years later, I'm very, very proud and happy to be a special education specialist. And I will tell you why. So when you look at a disability, what is the first thing that comes to your mind? What are the stereotypes that run through your minds when you think disability? For me, disability is merely a difference. It's a difference that can arise from physical aspects of your life. It's something that can be mental. It's something that can be sensory, something that is, or a combination of all of those. For me, that is what a disability is. And every day when I wake up to go to work, something that I'm very passionate about, I look at the children that I have to be with throughout the entire day and the entire week. All I see in them are strengths. And I never have to focus on any of their weaknesses. This is why I'm here today to talk to you about what I call people first language. People first language is a language that you use to emphasize on strengths rather than weaknesses. People first language reflects good manners. People first language is a language that will describe what a person has and not tell you who a person is. I'll give you an example. If you're going to talk about adults or children with disabilities, you're not going to call them handicapped or crippled. They are adults and children living with disabilities. If you look at a person on a wheelchair, for example, they are not confined to a wheelchair. They are merely using a wheelchair for access. If you look at, I'll give an example of, let's see. If you look at someone who's got intellectual disabilities, you're not going to call them retarded. That to me is people first language, and it shows good manners. It also reflects that you are in a space where you can interact with a person without overstepping boundaries and making them feel uncomfortable. So I'm here to encourage all of us here to think through some of those stereotypes that we've formed when it comes to disabilities. Culture, in one way or another, has formed our view of disabilities. We look at disability through cultural lenses. And from growing up, I grew up hearing things like, that person is disabled because their family is a family of witchcraft. I grew up hearing that this person is disabled because they committed a sin maybe the actual person that is disabled, or maybe it was their parents that committed a sin, and that disability has come as a result or as punishment for that sin. And you see, it's sad because it is from these stereotypes that we have formed, these labels that we have given, that form how we react when we are in a place and a person living with a disability walks in. Some people run away, literally. Some people will keep staring. Some people will get uncomfortable. Why? Because of those cultural stereotypes that we have grown with, those stereotypes that we have learned, or even sometimes things that we've heard from the media. And one thing I always talk about is, what are the labels that you don't like to be called? It's the same thing when it comes to a person living with a disability. There are labels that even they don't want to be called. And in life, generally, we like to generalize experiences. Because maybe you met a person living with a disability that behaved in a certain manner, and we get that generalization and put it on everybody that is living with disabilities. If you come into my space, if you come into what I'm passionate about and look at things the way I look at them, you will be very amazed at what persons that are living with disabilities are actually able to do. It'll be really, really amazing. And I would hope that would make us change how we view those disabilities, because our cultural perspective of disabilities sometimes will force us into treating people living with disabilities a certain way. In 2015, the Zambia Disability Survey went across the country to carry out a research on disability awareness. And it was very disheartening, the numbers of people that are being abused just because they have a disability. You find young girls who are sexually abused because someone thinks this one is a retard, so they can get their way with them and no one does anything. And unfortunately, even family may also have similar views. You would be amazed to see just how much people dwell on those cultural stereotypes in the way that they handle people and children living with disabilities. When it comes to the boys and the men, it was found that there was a lot of physical abuse that is being done on people living with disabilities, especially the men. The more severe the disability, the worse the atrocities that are happening. And this is in this century, where we are thinking people know that it's nothing to do with witchcraft or shame or punishment that has caused this disability. Remember, a disability is something that can come from birth, or it can be acquired in someone's lifetime. So this is where I'm here, and I want to talk about even just simple disability etiquette. If you meet a person that is living with a disability, I would urge you to ask questions. And you'll be surprised how people would want to share with you their story. And from their story, you'd be able to help. Or that conversation that you're having, if you need to ask any questions, you ask them within the boundaries of that conversation that you are having, where you don't make people very uncomfortable. You'd be surprised. Some people will actually refuse you to help them. Not that they are being arrogant, but because they know what they are doing and they know what they want. And maybe, in simple terms, they really don't need your help. But maybe they just need to interact with you. So these are some of those disability etiquettes that I would want to throw at us. In this very room, how deliberate are we about inclusion? I've seen a lot of art. I've seen poets, shorter documentaries and movies. How deliberate are you about inclusion? How safely can you say, when I'm making a program and a plan for something that I want to do, how many times do I think about deliberately including a person living with disabilities in the things that I'm doing? Even the study actually showed that legal aid, for example, even empowerment programs that go out into the rural areas, most people living with disabilities are not included. They are not included, but they are part of those communities where these services are going. Even just mere public services, education, health. You find that for them, access is actually a very big problem. And this is why, because we are not being deliberate about inclusion. So today, I'm hoping that with this kind of awareness, we will go back home and think, how deliberate are we when it comes to issues pertaining to disabilities for either children or adults? And before I leave, I'm going to leave you with 3 things. And these 3 things for me are the beginning of answering the big question of whose responsibility is it? For starters, I'm going to say that disability is a natural living process. It's natural. It's not superstitious. There are no stereotypes. It's just a natural process of life. And secondly, I would like to emphasize on the use of people-first language. When we try not to emphasize on weaknesses, we try not to label, and we try by all means to refrain from using certain words such as a retard, we are helping to focus on the strengths of an individual as opposed to always looking at what it is that they can't do. And thirdly, we have the power. We have the power to advocate for inclusion. We have the power to advocate for rights. We have the power to engage stakeholders. We have the power to promote inclusion and independent living. You know, disability is an equal opportunity club. Anyone, anytime can join. Thank you.